Hi, everyone. I'm Maggie McGrath, senior editor at Forbes. Meta faces a historic antitrust trial from the Federal Trade Commission, and on Monday, CEO Mark Zuckerberg took the stand to defend his company. Joining us to discuss these developments is my colleague on the tech team, Emily Baker-White. Emily, thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be here.
So this trial just began this week, but it has roots in 2020 and before. Can you lay out the context? What are the charges against Meta, and when did the FTC bring the case?
Yeah, so the charges against Meta go back far because they have to do with Meta's acquisition of WhatsApp and of Instagram. And so years ago, when Meta was Facebook, and when it was a much smaller company, Mark Zuckerberg pursued a strategy of purchasing both of those companies. And this case is largely about whether he purchased those companies in order to stifle competition.
Zuckerberg's intentions seem to be on trial here, which seem difficult to prove. It's always hard to know what someone has in their mind and in their heart when they do an action, right? Just in general. But does the FTC have a strong case here, in your opinion?
Proving motive is hard, but it's easier when there are receipts. And what the FTC has is some emails and other communications from Zuckerberg and his top lieutenants talking about their desire to buy these companies in order to neutralize competition. And that is sort of one of the strongest pieces of evidence that the FTC has here. But the FTC also has a challenge. They have to define a market for Facebook and then prove that Facebook was operating as a monopoly in that market. And that means deciding who Facebook or Meta's competitors are and were. And that gets into a really difficult sort of slicing and dicing. You have to think, is YouTube a competitor? Is TikTok a competitor, et cetera?
Defining a market here feels tricky, and I say this in part based on my own use of these services, right? You can go on Facebook Marketplace and find goods for your apartment. You can go on WhatsApp and message your friends. You can go on Instagram and post stories, and suddenly over the course of the day, Meta has monopolized my time, but I don't think that's what the FTC is arguing here, is it?
Yeah, so one of the trickiest things here, and one of the things that's like new in this case, or at least fairly new, we saw it in the Google antitrust case too, is that the primary asset here is data. We're used to talking about antitrust like for the creation of things. Do you have a monopoly in the car market? Do you have a monopoly in the book market? I can hold it in my hand. Like we know what the thing is. And here we're talking about monopolization of data. And that's a very different, tricky thing just for the judge to wrap his hands around.
Is there legal precedent? You mentioned the Google antitrust case, or are we flying blind, legally speaking?
There is some legal precedent, and this case is likely to make a lot too.
Fascinating. As we think about the ramifications, I know this trial just began, so we're probably a long way away from a verdict, much less the ramifications from those verdicts. But what are the stakes for Meta in this case?
They're enormous. So if Meta loses, Meta could be forced to break off those other companies that has become a core part of the Meta sort of family of apps, as they call them. A Meta where Instagram is no longer a part of the company, a Meta where WhatsApp is no longer a part of the company is a really, really different company. So this is existential for Meta.
Would Zuck get a choice in if one has to be divested, or is that something a judge would say, like, you have to get rid of WhatsApp or you have to get rid of Instagram?
If the FTC makes its case successfully here, the next step is to determine what the remedy is. And Meta is, of course, arguing that the idea of like unraveling these acquisitions or splitting these companies off is infeasible and undesirable for lots of reasons. But we're just going to have to see if the FTC is successful. We'll be having that conversation.
And we are talking about the FTC under President Trump. And so there's a little bit of a political question here. We've seen the tech CEOs get closer to the administration in its second go round than its first. Is this a test for the Trump administration to prove that it can be hard on big tech and monopolies, or what's your political analysis here?
This is really tricky. The FTC historically has been an independent agency and has operated pretty independently from the White House. It doesn't matter who's president, the FTC is going to do its thing. Not so under Donald Trump, who believes that all parts of the executive branch are solely his to control. And there has been reporting that Mark Zuckerberg is hoping that he might persuade Donald Trump somehow to stand down or to order his people to stand down in this case. It's not clear whether that will happen or how it would happen, but it's just the idea that Zuckerberg may be seeking some sort of extra legal, extrajudicial side deal to make this thing go away is itself a really interesting and important story. And it's not a place we've been before in antitrust.
That is fascinating. There are so many questions that remain going forward. I'm wondering, what will you be watching for on day 2 of the trial and day 3? And also, do we even know how long it will go on?
Weeks for sure. Likely longer than a month. It will be long. It will be granular. It'll be really sort of nitty-gritty. Cross-examination of Zuckerberg is going to be a big moment. It's not necessarily going to be the only big moment. I think also sort of watching the political winds, watching whether Trump says anything, gets involved in sort of any public way, or whether there's some back channel that Trump is operating in. It's not clear that he is going to do anything here, but I think Zuckerberg is certainly hoping he might.
Well, and if it could last for weeks and if not months, we've seen how fast the news cycle changes. So it's probably a little too soon to even guess what the president may do here. Is there anything else that the Forbes audience should know about this case and what it means for big tech?
I think we are in a moment where big tech is hyper concentrated, right? You've got Facebook, you've got Google, you've got Amazon. And it does seem like Google, of course, had an antitrust trial where it largely lost. Um, we're seeing a moment of concentration, and then we're seeing a government response to that. And I think it's sort of too early to tell, but an interesting question to ask to see, like, is the government eventually going to take the stance that, like, this amount of concentration is not appropriate and that we actually do need more smaller actors? It seems far from certain that will be the case, but if that is the outcome of some of these FTC actions, that would be really interesting.
Those are all the legal questions. I mentioned myself using these platforms. Is there anything that consumers should know? Is anything going to change while this case goes on, or is it business as usual until the court makes its decision?
Nothing is going to change for a while. I don't think your experience on the platforms will be different, but I do think sort of lurking in the back of this is there have been consumer actions against Meta that are moving forward, and thinking about, you know, people have largely turned on Facebook and Meta. On Instagram, they talk about the platform and shitifying. They talk about there are more ads than ever. People only use Facebook for marketplace now, right? And that's of course not necessarily true around the globe. And this is still a company that has immense power. But I think there's something to, as the FTC goes through this process, just how much the public has sort of turned on Meta and their products. I don't think you find a lot of people who unambiguously say, yeah, I love that company.
That's a really good point. And yet, when there was a WhatsApp outage a few months ago, it felt like the world seized up a little bit. Have you or have any of our colleagues at Forbes looked at which part of Meta is most valuable, not just monetarily, but in the cultural cachet? Because I think of WhatsApp as the golden goose in this portfolio.
Certainly internationally, I think that's right. And it's easy in the United States to discount just how powerful WhatsApp has been across the world, and to connect families where people are in different, jurisdictions and have sort of different access to information. WhatsApp is really a lifesaver there. Yeah, I'm really curious to see how it turns out.
So many questions. We will have to have you back as this trial unfolds because, like you said, I think it will be granular. There will be nitty-gritty, and we'll have to have you back to sort them through. But Emily Baker White, thank you so much for joining us to discuss the Meta antitrust trial.